Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathan. I love movies and I want to share that with you. From old originals to cult classics and foreign favorites, along with straight up drivel, WWW is your place for all things movies. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Wednesdays, the show where we talk about 3 movies all in the same night. And for tonight's episode, we're taking a look at dystopian movies. Yay! Don't we all love dystopia and the end of the world? I know I do, for sure. Now, when I say dystopia, you may be thinking of a certain series of books that were then adapted into movies with a well-known actor or actress attached to them that a lot of people have heard of before. And before you ask, no, we're not talking about the Hunger Games movies. We're talking about something that's kind of similar to the Hunger Games movies and came out around the same time. And that would be the Maze Runner trilogy. The 3 movies on our watch list tonight are going to consist of The Maze Runner from 2014, The Scorch Trials from 2015, and The Death Cure from 2018. I almost said 1998 for some reason, but no. The Death Cure is from 2018. Now, before we go to break, really quickly, I just want to acknowledge that for The Scorch Trials and The Death Cure, both of them have The Maze Runner before them in the title, but to keep it simple and short, I just wanted to say The Scorch Trials and The Death Cure. That's what they say in the title cards anyways, so it made sense to list them as that, rather than The Maze Runner, The Scorch Trials, or The Maze Runner, The Death Cure. With all that out of the way, I wanted to also mention that I've never read these books. I just wanted to watch the trilogy because it had Dylan O'Brien in it. And we'll get into why that was a good idea after the break with the original Maze Runner. Stick around for that. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. For our first movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The Maze Runner from 2014, available to rent now from places such as Amazon, YouTube, Fandango at Home, and Apple TV. For the basic plot summary of The Maze Runner, we follow Thomas as he wakes up with no memories, trapped inside a maze. He must now work with the other boys around him to find a way to escape said maze. Now, of course, maybe you haven't heard that plot summary before, but you've probably heard of the Maze Runner series before. It's kind of a semi-well-known series of movies with my generation more specifically, which would be kind of Generation Z area type of people. Whenever I ask people around my age if they've heard of it, a lot of them will say that they have and they like it, but maybe not everybody's heard of it. But I was at least surprised to see how many people had actually heard of it. So it's kind of this weird in-between where I've heard of it, some people around me have heard of it, but maybe not all my regular listeners have heard of it before. So I have to just at least throw that out there before we get going. Now, here's the thing. Maybe people have heard of it, maybe they haven't. What a lot of people have heard is that it's kind of decent, it's pretty good. And that's what I'd heard about it. I'd heard that the first one, at the very least, was pretty good. I'd actually heard some people say they really liked it. And I can count myself in that category as well. When it comes to the first Maze Runner, I will say it's pretty good. I was kind of surprised. I was pleasantly surprised in a way, but I thought, yeah, this is pretty good. It's not anything more than pretty good, but it's pretty good. I don't think it's amazing or anything. I don't exactly relate to people who say it's super awesome or they love and adore it. I can admit that it's pretty good. I think you could see where I'm going with this. I'm going to start criticizing the movie now, and we're going to get into that right about now. So, first issue. I think this movie has pretty generic dialogue. I think this movie suffers from having predictable dialogue. When I say generic and predictable, you may think they're exactly the same thing. There's a difference. At first, it'll start off as generic, such as saying, oh, he'll show up again, or let's wait for this person, right? It's like, oh, for an example, they got to run through the maze, right? And so they're waiting for the person who's running through the maze. And they keep saying, is he going to come back? And somebody says, he'll come back. But what if he doesn't? He'll come back. I've heard that before. You've heard that before. Everybody's heard that before. Where it starts getting predictable is when you can tell exactly what the response is going to be. So take that same example and think, okay, if we're this far into the movie and they're running through the maze again, let's say, what if they don't come back? Well, then we'll just keep moving forward. If you're able to predict that as the response, that's when it starts getting predictable. That second example doesn't really apply to Maze Runner, but the first one definitely does. There's a difference wherein dialogue that is generic will eventually become... I was about to say prime directive for some reason. Predictable. Generic dialogue will eventually become predictable. That's the big issue with the original Maze Runner. And for the other ones, honestly, it just has dialogue that I can see coming from a mile away. What I couldn't see coming from a mile away is how much of that dialogue is spent on exposition. The parts that weren't generic and predictable were mostly exposition. A lot of talking and explaining what the rules of this world are, because keep in mind, Thomas has woke up with no memory in the middle of a maze, and he doesn't know what's going on, if you can imagine. So there has to be people there to explain to him what's going on. Except maybe they explain a little too much as to what's going on, because nearly any piece of dialogue that is not generic or predictable is exposition. Nearly all of it. And it gets to a point where my brain doesn't keep up with a lot of the exposition, especially when it's happening so quickly. A lot of the exposition is delivered in that first 20 minutes of the movie. And that's kind of a crucial point in the movie, where you have to kind of figure out, how do we balance telling enough of this story to get the ball rolling, but not so much that we reveal so much that the audience can't keep up with it. And I feel like Maze Runner is leaning on the side of revealing a little too much too fast and making it difficult to follow along when things start changing and getting different. I feel like they could have sparsed it out a little bit more and not have over-explained as much as they did. Some of that is a personal preference. Some of that, I think, is legitimate criticism. I will say, when it comes to how fast this movie goes and with how many things keep happening, you do expect there to be a lot of characters. Or at least you understand that there might be a few characters that show up to help Thomas on his journey. And I will say, personally, I think there's a little too many characters in Maze Runner, but the core group is there. And we have Thomas, our main character, and he has to go on a journey to figure out how to escape the maze. Regardless of what I think of the character of Thomas, I will say that Dylan O'Brien does a smash-up job as playing this character who's thrown into a situation and doesn't know what to do. I like Dylan O'Brien in this movie, and I like him in the other two for sure. Dylan O'Brien deserves the hype he's gotten. He's great. The character is a different story, but we'll get into that later. I will also admit that no matter how much I dislike the exposition, and no matter how much I think it moves too fast for its own good, this movie has one thing up its sleeve that does not feel generic or predictable when it comes to this kind of situation. Actually, it has two things up its two sleeves. The first one is the maze itself. If you can imagine, a movie called The Maze Runner needs to focus on, the maze. And the maze in The Maze Runner is fantastic. It's really cool. It's so cool. It has almost this mysterious yet ancient allure to it that makes me wish we spent more time in it, because we really don't spend enough time in that maze to get the full picture of it. We spend enough time, but we don't spend enough time. I realize I just contradicted myself. What I mean is, we spend some time, but not enough time. That's what I meant to say. And the second trick it has up its sleeve comes along with the maze, which comes in the form of the Grievers, the monsters that live inside the maze. These really weird-looking 2014 era CGI fly spider biomechanical robot things. They're awesome. I love the Grievers. They're so cool. They're so horrifying. And I think they were the standout feature of this movie. I wish I understood them more. I will say, unfortunately, it does lead the filmmakers to think that the movie's a horror movie because they have a giant mechanical spider thing. Let me clarify. I don't think this movie's very good at being a horror movie. I think it's pretty good at being a mysterious sort of sci-fi adventure movie that has giant robot spiders. I don't think it's a very good horror movie. I think it relies too much on jump scares with the giant grievers. Granted, they are pretty horrifying, but you could do better than that. I think what all I've said so far has been a little disorganized. It's almost like the inside of my brain is a maze that I'm trying to run around. But to conclude everything I've said so far, I think it's safe to say that I don't think Maze Runner is all it's cracked up to be, but I can understand it if people say this is one of their favorite movies, or if they love the movie, or if they really like it, or they have nostalgia for it. I can understand that. I would be a little suspicious if somebody said the same thing about our next movie, which is the sequel, The Scorch Trials. But we'll get into that after the break, so stick around. 88 won the Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our second movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The Scorch Trials from 2015, available to rent from Amazon, Fandango at home, and Apple TV. I can speak today, words are good. So, for the basic plot summary of The Scorch Trials, we follow Thomas, yet again, and his friends, as they must escape from the corporation Wicked, and must find the resistance, wow, I can totally speak, the resistance group called the Right Arm. Now, before we go any further, you may be asking the valid question, if you've never heard of these movies before, what's Wicked and what's the Right Arm and what happened? What do you mean? Did they escape from something? What happened? So here's the deal. The first movie ends on a pretty big cliffhanger that kind of inadvertently, no, actually directly spoils itself when the plot summary of the second movie is read. It ties in pretty directly to the next movie. That's kind of the whole point, right? So unfortunately, because of the way rules work with my show, I don't always reveal spoilers, but when it's something like this, it's kind of hard not to reveal spoilers. So I'll say this much. Wicked is the name of the organization that put Thomas in the maze, right? And the Right Arm is the resistance group that's fighting Wicked. Now then, with that out of the way, let's get into the movie itself. The Scorch Trials, the follow-up to the original Maze Runner, a movie that I thought was pretty good, but nothing more than pretty good. This one's not pretty good. It's fine-ish, kinda, not really. Here's the deal. There are a lot of chase sequences in the Scorch Trials. Let me rephrase that. There are a lot of chase sequences in the Scorch Trials. Let me rephrase that yet again. There's a lot of chase sequences in the Scorch Trials. Half the movie feels like an entire chase sequence. And while I'm all for chase sequences, I'm not all for chase sequences. Here's the issue I have with chase sequences in movies like this. When you just have the general goal of go find Right Arm, they live in the mountains. Okay, let's go to the mountains. It kind of just loses a lot of impact and meaning to have them just go to the mountains to find the Right Arm. You know? It's not all that entertaining to watch them just run in that direction for half the time. It doesn't feel like it has a lot of stakes. It doesn't feel like there's a personal connection to a lot of what's going on. They're just kind of getting away from Wicked to go find the Right Arm. It's simple and it can work, but here's the issue. These filmmakers don't exactly know how to perfectly balance those kinds of things with each other. It needs to have a good balance. It can't just all be running. You need to have good moments where they're not running, and there's long stretches of them just running. I know it's called Maze Runner, but holy goodness. That's what I'm going to go with. Holy goodness. This movie has more running in it than the original Maze Runner. I'm not kidding. I haven't measured it. I haven't timed it. But in my opinion, this has more running than the original Maze Runner did. And this isn't technically called Maze Runner, The Scorch Trials. This is just called The Scorch Trials. It doesn't have... There's a lot more running in this than the movie just called The Maze Runner. How is that possible? It probably doesn't help that half the time it's just them directionlessly running in certain directions and them just going, come on, guys, we gotta go. Over and over again. They repeat the same pieces of dialogue while running away over and over. Come on, guys, let's go. Go, go, go. Come on, move. Let's move. Come on, let's go. While most of the time Thomas is the one saying these things, he's also the one who stands there and watches whatever is coming towards them moved in their direction for a good 5 to 10 seconds before he starts running. You could see why that would get a little frustrating to watch over and over again when half the time it's just that. That's a little frustrating to watch. I will also mention this movie has the problem that the first movie had in having too many characters that we don't all remember, to the point where a certain character dies, and my immediate reaction was, oh no, that character died. Who was him? Who was he? Who is that? Who again? Who was that? Oh no, he died. Who is that? No, seriously, who was that? Who was that? When that's the reaction, usually isn't a good sign that you've created a memorable character. Let's just put it that way. Or maybe you haven't set him up properly compared to how he was set up in the books that these movies are based off of. If I could forget his name and then he dies, okay, I remember him now because he died, but he died, so I could remember him. Do you see the problem? There's a bad correlation there, a very bad correlation there. Not to mention that some of the characters I do remember don't seem to do anything. Probably the biggest complaint I have is that the character Teresa does not do a whole lot. She doesn't do anything in the first movie. She barely does anything in the first movie. In this movie, she doesn't do a whole lot. Granted, she does do something. She at least does something compared to the first movie. And this is where we get to the weirdest part of the Scorch Trials. Before we get there, I should mention that one of my favorite things about the Scorch Trials is that unlike most bad movie sequels, it doesn't actually have the same problems as the original Maze Runner and then amplifies those problems. It has its own separate list of problems. Like the fact that it's longer than the original Maze Runner and has a better setup than the original Maze Runner and isn't so fast in the first 20 minutes like the original Maze Runner. But that just makes me think, why wasn't the original Maze Runner exactly like this? It needed to be longer. It was too fast, and it needed to have better pacing. Why did it have this over its predecessor? But then it kind of still ended up amplifying all the problems that the original movie had anyways. No matter what, here's the thing. Here's the entire thing. One positive detail that the Scorch Trials carries on from the original Maze Runner is the ending. Here's where I get confused. For some reason, somehow, by some sheer miracle, the last 20 minutes of The Maze Runner, The Scorch Trials, are fantastic. They're action-packed, they're tense, they're emotional, they're interesting, they're unique. It feels like a good way to end it. And it still leaves off on a pretty big cliffhanger. And it blew my mind. It was like somebody flipped a switch that suddenly said, hey, let's make the movie good all of a sudden. And I'm glad they did it, but it took me sitting through nearly half of the runtime being boring chase sequences to get to a good conclusion. I don't know how it happened. I really don't know how it happened. But on the sheer basis of that ending is fantastic, I would weirdly recommend the Scorch Trials if you like the original Maze Runner. I wouldn't recommend going all the way and watching the third movie, but we're going to get into that after the break, so stick around for that. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our third and final movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The Death Cure from 2018, available to rent from Amazon, Apple TV, and Fandango at Home. For the basic plot summary of The Death Cure, we follow Thomas, yet again, and his remaining friends as they must break into Wicked headquarters to rescue one of their own. Although that is the basic plot summary of The Death Cure, I would say that there's a lot more to it than that, but I only have so much time in these segments, and I can only say so much about the movies when it comes to the plots, and I hate talking about plots. I want to talk about the movie itself. So, let's break that down. Here's the thing. When it comes to visuals, The Death Cure is an upgrade. When it comes to the movie itself, I'd say that the visuals are the only thing that have been upgraded, rather unfortunately. Here's the problem. Okay, I want to start yelling and getting really mad, but I don't have the energy to do that right now. And besides, why would I do that for Maze Runner? The first movie was just fine. It was pretty good. The second one, I just got a bit annoyed that there was a lot of running and no real direction to either the movie or the running, to be completely honest. Because half the time, Thomas was looking behind him anyways. Okay, I'm a little mad. And I do want to start yelling just a little bit. But do I really want to waste my energy on that today when I could just be kind of factual and just speak normally? Actually, no, that sounds boring. Let's go back to yelling. So, I've changed my mind. Let's yell instead. Here's the thing. It took me until the third movie in this trilogy to realize something crucial. It took me until about halfway through the third movie to realize and digest exactly what my problem was with the second movie and this third movie. And why I think the first movie was the best one, and why I think it is kind of unfortunate that it got a couple sequels when quite clearly it needed a little more time in the oven. Maybe the books were like this as well. I'm sure they were. Here's the problem. When you start off a series called The Maze Runner, and you have it be this dystopian story, and it's kind of similar to The Hunger Games, right? I know it's not based on The Hunger Games. It is similar. It is still a dystopian story set in kind of a difficult situation with a bunch of teenagers, right? Now then, when you have something called Hunger Games, you'd expect the Hunger Games to show up in each movie and book. To my knowledge, that's how they work. When you have something called The Maze Runner, you'd hope that the maze would show up in the other two movies. Right? You'd hope that. That feels logical to say out loud. And yet, for the entirety of the second movie, they do not go into a different maze. And for the entirety of the third movie, they do not go into a different maze. Except for maybe 5 minutes there where someone imagines being in the maze again. They're not in the maze for the second or third movies. They are in either the middle of the desert or in a city. Let me clarify, it's not called Desert Runner and it's not called City Runner. It is called Maze Runner. Where is the maze? Where is the maze? I didn't ask for a plot surrounding Thomas and his friends breaking into a city because they're all immune to this future disease that has infected the entire world. I did not ask for that. Why on earth does them being immune to this disease have to involve them going into a maze in the first place? It feels so completely disconnected from each other. Why aren't they in a maze again? I want them to be in a maze. Here's the problem. Now that I've gone off on this tangent, I think I'm going to have a hard time getting back to the point. But is there really any other point? I think the real point when it comes to The Death Cure is that it made me realize that there were just too many characters in these movies. There were characters played by big names like Walton Goggins and Giancarlo Esposito, who I just can't remember their names. Dylan O'Brien is good. I remember his character's name, Thomas. Doesn't mean I exactly like Thomas as a character. I think he's a bit annoying, Not because Dylan O'Brien is annoying to me. It's because the character is written to be annoying and say generic stuff and still look behind him while running. He's not very good at running for being the main character in a series called The Maze Runner and being a maze runner. He's not very good at running. I'll be completely honest with you. Thomas is the worst at running out of all of them. And he's in the movie called The Maze Runner. That's a weird contrast, but I can remember his name. I can remember the character Newt, who's played by Thomas Brody Sanger. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. I only remember that because he also voiced Ferb in Phineas and Ferb, but, you know, side tangent. I remember characters like Frying Pan, because how do you forget a name like Frying Pan? And I remember Teresa, because Teresa doesn't do anything. She does a lot more in this movie, and even then, half the time, she's doing nothing. I remember her because she does nothing. Those are the main characters I remember. I also remember some character named Gally, but I'm sure he's not important. He is important. I'm making a joke. Don't worry about it. Here's the thing. I remember those characters. I can't remember any of the other characters' names. I struggle to remember them. And that's a problem when there's a lot of other characters that are important to the story and a lot of other characters that are not. I feel like there's an overabundance of characters here, and I'm losing track of what's going on at any given moment because who are these people? Why is this important? Why does this matter? What does this have to do with Thomas? Not even. Most of the time, they're not separated from Thomas, and I still don't remember their names. That's a problem. That's a huge problem that even the first movie struggled with. I will also say that we yet again have chase sequences with annoying generic dialogue where nothing unique is happening. And it's predictable. It gets so predictable to the point where I was just saying the next lines out loud and then laughing to myself that I got it exactly on point correct. When that's happening, you know it's predictable because I sometimes think that stuff is new and interesting and unique when it's probably not. So if you're not fooling me, then you're not fooling anybody else. Again, I need to ask, why on earth are they not in a maze? Why does any of this have to revolve around curing a disease? It's called the death cure. Why is this about the death cure? What does this have to do with the maze? I had to look up why they were in the maze in the first place because it was explained in the books. It's not explained in the movies. If I did miss where it was explained in the movies, that's because there was too much exposition to begin with. Here's the thing. First Maze Runner is pretty decent, and I would recommend it on the sheer basis of it's fun. It's a harmless enjoyable. The second Maze Runner is weirdly good for the last 20 minutes. If you watch the rest of it, you're not going to think that the 20 minutes were worth it. But, I mean, I would still recommend it on a basis. The third movie, if you skip the third movie, you're not missing much. Completely honest with you. You'll miss a visual upgrade, but you're not missing much. I think the reason I'm getting frustrated is because these kinds of movies are the most frustrating to talk about because you can see the potential they have with the first movie, and you can see how this could have been really popular and amazing and really cool. And it just doesn't live up to the expectations and really doesn't... It sticks the ending with the third movie where the last 40 minutes are the best part of the movie and they're pretty good. But it's kind of like, okay, for a combined total of an hour out of these both 2 hours and 10-minute movies in the latter half of this trilogy, by that I mean the last two movies, you kind of start to realize, hang on a second, I'm just watching these movies to see like a good ending, and that's about it. Granted, you get good endings, but it just kind of gets frustrating to a point where you're realizing, why am I watching the rest of these movies? I don't need to. I only saw the first one. I don't want to watch the rest of them. And that's kind of the unfortunate reality of talking about trilogies sometimes. They just kind of turn out that way. But at the very least, I got to see Dylan O'Brien. So that kind of made it worth it, kind of. With all that being said, I don't want it to continue on for too much longer. Otherwise, I'll start rambling again about why there isn't a maze in the death cure. So, with all that being said, thank you for listening into What to Watch Wednesdays tonight. I will be back next Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. here on 88.1 The Burg for another episode. If you want to follow along with What to Watch Wednesdays, check out at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces, on both Instagram and YouTube. And I will be back next Wednesday telling you all what to watch. Good night, everybody.